Okay. A good Davach. Um, Tonight is the anniversary of passing of the Rambam, and this week is the anniversary of passing of the Alter Rebbe. So I wanted to share a few stories about the time period of the passing of the Alter Rebbe this week. And it's known that the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam, their anniversaries of passing being proximity is not just by accident, everything's by divine providence, and there's a very unique bond that the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe share. So tonight, being the anniversary of the passing of the Rambam, it's a time of salvation for the Jewish people. The word Rambam, which stands for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, the name of the Rambam and his father, is also an acronym for the words Revois Mayiv Seibat Mitzrayim. Hashem said, "I will bring tremendous miracles in the land of Egypt to bring salvation to the Jewish people." And so it's a day of the passing of the tzaddik. The soul of the tzaddik ascends to a higher place, and from that higher place, he channels salvation to the earth. This should be a time of salvation for us all, and we should see the redemption from this present day Egypt and freedom of all the hostages and the freedom of all the Jewish people from exile. So the Alter Rebbe's leadership can be divided in various ways, but as I mentioned a few weeks ago, the Alter Rebbe, after his second arrest, he moved from Liozna to Liadi, and it was there in Liadi that the Alter Rebbe's leadership took on a whole new level. The Rebbe Rashab famously said that just like an olive, only when it's crushed does it produce oil, so too only when the Alter Rebbe was first went through the hardship of his imprisonment, only then did his discourses really take on a whole new different kind of depth and length. As you just see that in looking at the discourses before and after his imprisonment, there's a marked difference. The saying by Hasidim is that the discourses before Petersburg, before his imprisonment in Petersburg, burned the world. They were so powerful and sharp and inspirational, very short but piercing. But after he was imprisoned, his discourses took on a whole new length and breadth and depth. And so this was a result of the Alter Rebbe's imprisonment, as their Brashab said. This is what causes this greater revelation. And this the 11 years that the Alter Rebbe spent in Liadi, you could see that discourses also are a lot greater, many more discourses. Possibly, this also has to do with other historical events that happened at that time. The Alter Rebbe was visited by the Baal Shem Tov and the Mezritcher Maggid when he was in prison. It was long after their passing, but they visited him in prison, and they asked him why he was being imprisoned. They told him it was because of his spreading these teachings of Chassidus. They asked him if he should stop. They said no, he should continue and do even more. So the Alter Rebbe, among all the students of the Mezritcher Maggid, they divided the who should share and teach Chassidus in various regions. So the Alter Rebbe was entrusted with the entire Russia, and so this went on for years. So the Alter Rebbe writes in the introduction to Tanya how he needed to write this book because there's no time for him to answer everyone's questions. Everyone's coming to him to ask questions, and he has no time to answer everyone's questions. That's why he wanted to write the Tanya, so that people could find the answers to their questions. And the Alter Rebbe says that people who are more knowledgeable in Tanya could point to those who have just discovered the Tanya, the direct answer to the question, because they're proficient in the entire book. But the reason for the book is because he cannot possibly meet everyone one-on-one because the amount of people that he needed to speak to. There was other students of the Maggid who were sharing and teaching Hasidus in other regions, but in Russia it was only the Alter Rebbe. There was another tzaddik in Russia for a while, whose name was Rebbe Shema Kaliner. Shema Kaliner unfortunately had to leave Russia in the year Tov Kuf Mem Beis, because of the persecution of the Misnagdim, those who opposed the ways of Hasidus. They caused him to move, and he had to escape to Ludmir. And there were people that wanted him to return back after he moved there, but Ravam Kalisker and Mendel Haradoker were then the leaders, the leading tzaddikim at the time, leading the elder students of the Mitzvah Magid. They said that we had already they said Oisem Mashach, we have anointed the Alter Rebbe. Pele Yoyet, he gives wondrous advice, so he should be the only one that is governing and the Hasidim in Russia. And this went on until Tovkuf Nun Aleph, when the B'Shem Kaliner passed away. When he passed away, two of his students, Mordechai Lechovitcher and Osher Staliner, they moved back into Russia. And until that time period, there was not such a distinction between the way of Chabad and the ways of other streams of Hasidus. Until the Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, it wasn't such a clear demarcation between his path and other paths of Hasidus. And so at that time, the Ravam Kalisker had a series of letters between him and the Alter Rebbe, arguing about the Alter Rebbe's path, if it's correct, if it's not correct. And so because of this, although until Mendel Haradoker passed away, this was respected. This should only be the region of the Alter Rebbe. But after he passed away, the Ravam Kalisker encouraged these tzaddikim to move to Russia and to serve as Hasidic Rebbes in various cities in Russia, and perhaps that did contribute to the Alter Rebbe having more time. But be as it may, the Alter Rebbe called in the Mittler Rebbe a year before his passing, and he told Mittler Rebbe that he wanted to divide Russia into 3 sections, and he wanted to go for a month to various regions in Russia, and that way it's too hard for all the Hasidim to go visit the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe said he wanted to go to various to take a journey every year to go to one city in one region for a month, another city in the second region, a third city, and the third region every year to do that. That's what he wanted to do. But at that time, the war broke out between Napoleon and the Tsar. There was a discussion among the tzaddikim of the time who was better for the Jewish people. The Kozhen Magid, he was of the opinion that the best one to for the sake of the Jewish people was Napoleon, but the Alter Rebbe was completely opposed to this. There was some tradition that these tzaddikim knew. It's not something that we can understand how this works or why this works, but before Rosh Hashanah, the Kozhen Magid decided that he's going to blow the shofar first, early in the morning, and he'll pray very quickly and blow the shofar first, and that way, what he wants, that Napoleon should win, his blowing of the shofar will make that happen. But that year, the Alter Rebbe blew shofar before he began to pray. And when the Kozhen Magid began to daven, he said, he took the shofar to his mouth, he said, it's of no use. The Litvak, they used to call the Alter Rebbe the Litvak because he was from Lithuania. He already beat us to it. He already blew the shofar. And that would certainly secure the victory of the Tsar over Napoleon. There were other Hasidic Rebbes who didn't understand the Alter Rebbe's support for the Tsar. As one Hasidic Rebbe said a disparaging remark about the Tsar. He said, Fonya is a ganiv, Fonya is a ritzeach, Fonya is a neif. He said, the Tsar, there's all kinds of terrible things. So the Alter Rebbe responded, Fonya is a ganiv, Fonya is a ritzeach, Fonya is a neif. Yes, the Tsar, Fonya is a derogatory Russian term. He does all those terrible things. It's true. However, he doesn't hide, he doesn't conceal the oneness of Hashem. Napoleon, in other words, he was completely disconnected with any belief in God. In fact, there was once a day of prayer instituted by religious leaders in France, and Napoleon negated the whole thing. Like that, what a waste of time! Don't do that. The Mittler Rebbe writes in a fascinating letter, the difference between Napoleon and the Tsar, how the Tsar, um, there were various Tsars that were terrible for the Jewish people, but that was later on. Later on, Tsar Nikolai, he promoted the Scholar movement. He caused the Cantonists, the decree of the Cantonists, where they would take Jewish boys at the age of 9 years old to serve in the Tsar's army for 25 years. But this was not the case in the time of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, the Tsar Alexander, the Tsar Pavel, those Tsars had no problem with Judaism. In fact, one of the reasons that they interrogated the Alter Rebbe and the arrested the Alter Rebbe was the claim was that he's changing Judaism. Now, why would the Tsar care about him changing Judaism? It's because the Tsars had no problem with Judaism. But they did believe in God, and they told their soldiers, and during this war against Napoleon, that we are on the side of God, and we're fighting against the enemies of God. That's the way that they framed the war to their soldiers. So the Alter Rebbe was, as Mittler Rebbe said, the Alter Rebbe was of the opinion that if Napoleon would win, because of his cruelty, because of his murderous nature, because of his complete denial of God, the Mittler Rebbe writes, the Alter Rebbe's opinion was that not one Jew would maintain his Judaism under the rulership of Napoleon. The Alter Rebbe wasn't just involved in a spiritual war against Napoleon, but the Alter Rebbe also was involved actually physically. He was involved in an actual war against Napoleon by he assigned one of his chassidim, not one, but many of his chassidim, to spy against Napoleon. Napoleon, has by this time of his life, was already very successful on his way to becoming the emperor of the world as he wanted to be. He had already conquered many countries, and in order to get to Russia, he'd have to pass through Poland, Lithuania, White Russia, and only then could he arrive at Moscow. And the Alter Rebbe said that if he would go to Poland, so then it would stay in Poland, it would be terrible for the Jews there. But the Alter Rebbe says if he continues, he will have his downfall in Russia as he did. So, and the Alter Rebbe said that he doesn't want to be under his rulership even for a day. And because Napoleon was advancing in regions where there were a lot of Jews, there was a time when, not just a time, but in Russia, there are many areas of Jews not allowed to live. However, Russia conquered part of Poland. And because it conquered part of Poland, there were hundreds of thousands of Jews living in Poland. So although Russia had these all these rules about where Jews were allowed to live, they weren't about to uproot all the Jews from their homes when they conquered Poland. So therefore, there was a large swath of Russia, which was then conquered, which was previously under Polish rule, that was with a lot of Jews living there. So because White Russia, which was previously Poland, had a lot of Jews living there, the Jews were able to be of service to the Tsar, and they were able to spy for the Tsar against Napoleon. And so the Alter Rebbe entrusted one of his Chassidim, Moshe Meislish, for example, as one of his spies to directly inform the Tsar about various things that were vital to the war effort. For example, there was one famous story where Moshe Meislish was in a war room with other generals. Moshe Meislish was a very prestigious person, and therefore he was well respected. And he spoke French. He was well respected by the French, and he also knew Russian. And so he originally was on the side of Napoleon. He thought that he had to serve Napoleon, and when he heard that the Alter Rebbe was against Napoleon, that's when he switched sides, and that's when he used his connection to help the Tsar. And so when he was in this war room, and they were discussing various ways to that their armies should advance, looking at the maps, as they're discussing everything, Napoleon himself runs into the room. And Napoleon notices how this Moshe Meislish is paying far too much attention to the proceedings. So he runs in the room and he says, "You're a Russian spy." And he puts his hands on Ramosha Meislish's heart, and he wanted to see his heart would beat faster, but it didn't, and Napoleon let him go. The Ramosha Meislish later said it was the Aleph Beis of Chassidus. It was the ABCs of Chassidus that saved my life. The simple, one of the first things that Chassidus says is that the mind controls the heart. So it was because he was able to control his heart that Napoleon didn't sense any sense of fear in him. So Napoleon did proceed to conquer Poland, and went into White Russia. Liadi was someone on the border between White Russia and Lithuania. And so when Napoleon arrived there, the Alter Rebbe said he wants to leave us. Want to be one day under his rulership. And the day before Chodesh Elul, the end of Ma'achamav, the Alter Rebbe went with his whole family in 20 wagons, leave Liadi. The Alter Rebbe went with 4 families: his family, his 2 sons, including his sons, the Mittler Rebbe's son-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek. They traveled together, and they went with Rebbetzin Freda and her husband, the Alter Rebbe's daughter, who was a brilliant scholar of Chassidus, and her husband. And they went also with another Chassid Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Kazik. And together with them, there were also many ministers of Russian nobility that also escaped at that time. Most didn't want to be under Napoleon's rule. So about 60 wagons, a third of those wagons with Alter Rebbe, that left at that same time. They had to leave in the middle of the night because of the approaching armies. But the Alter Rebbe wanted that. The Alter Rebbe knew that Napoleon was a sorcerer. He didn't want any of the items that belonged to him to fall into his hands. So when he left, he wanted everything to be taken. But as he had already left Liadi, the Alter Rebbe asked for 2 horses and a light carriage to go back. He went back to his home, and he found in his home there were 3 items that were still there. They found worn out slippers and a kneading trough, and the Alter Rebbe took all these items, and then set the home on fire. And when Napoleon actually arrived, as Alter was leaving, Napoleon was entering into this Liadi. That same moment, the Napoleon was entering from the other side when the Alter was leaving. And when the Napoleon arrived, he asked right away. The general of Napoleon asked, "Where is the home of the Grand Rabbi?" And they went to the street of the Alter Rebbe, and they found the home in flames. And Napoleon offered a great reward if anyone had anything or a coin of any finance that would belong to the Alter Rebbe. So, the Alter Rebbe was traveling away from Napoleon, and it was a very terrible winter, and it was very hard to travel. Whatever Napoleon traveled through, his armies burned homes and burned everything as they traveled. It was they were traveling away from the war, and Napoleon was traveling closer to the east towards Moscow. The Alter Rebbe was traveling sort of northeast, away from Napoleon, and it was very hard to travel because of it was difficult winter, and they was traveling with men, women, and children. And the Alter Rebbe was traveling in the 3rd wagon, and whenever they got to a crossroads, they would ask the Alter Rebbe where to go. The Alter Rebbe's grandson, Reb Nachum, was in the front wagon, and sometimes the Alter Rebbe would answer while he was sitting in the wagon. Sometimes the Alter Rebbe would walk out into the crossroads, and he would tell them where they should go. And on one occasion, Reb Nachum asked the Alter Rebbe which way to go, and the Alter Rebbe told him, and he misunderstood. And the Alter Rebbe said, he remarked, "It's wonderful when the grandson follows the ways of the grandfather, but not when the grandfather has to follow the ways of the grandson." Anyway, so the Alter Rebbe, being now in a safe space, so far from the war, was trying to discover the best place to move with all of his family, because they discovered that their homes were there's no place to go back to. Napoleon had already the Tsar didn't have to have to fight with Napoleon directly. Napoleon entered Moscow on Yom Kippur, and his soldiers really ran out of provisions. The Russians destroyed all their provisions, all their food, and Napoleon had to retreat with only a few soldiers back to France. But Alter Rebbe and his family had to decide where to move to, and so the Alter Rebbe sent his son, the Mittler Rebbe, to Kremenchuk to find a place there to move to. While the Mittler Rebbe was in Kremenchuk, the Alter Rebbe became very ill, and it was Motzei Shabbos, and they were in the city of Vienna, and the Tzemach Tzedek, seeing how his grandfather was so unwell, he davened Ma'ariv, the evening prayer, with a very bitter tune. The Alter Rebbe watched him. When he concluded, the Alter Rebbe said to him, "I want to share with you what I learned from my teacher, the Zitcha Magid, how the Zohar says, when there's happiness in this world, it brings happiness from on high. This world is like the world above it, and happiness here brings happiness in Shemayim, happiness in heaven." And the Alter Rebbe said that it says in the Torah that upon Hashem's throne there is an image of man, Molmaila. And upon God's throne, there's an image of man. The Alter Rebbe said that the image of man in this world, man's happiness in this world, that causes that image to be in heaven. The happiness of a person in this world, the Jew shows happiness in this world, that brings happiness in Shemayim, happiness in heaven, and draws God's kindness to the world. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe told his grandson, Tzemach Tzedek, that he shouldn't pray that way. That was the last Ma'ariv before the Alter Rebbe's passing. The Alter Rebbe asked to make Havdalah on coffee. He wasn't well enough to make coffee, take Havdalah on wine. It's interesting that generations later, the Rebbe Rashab also passed away on Motzei Shabbos, and he also asked to take Havdalah on coffee before he passed away. So it was Motzei Shabbos Parsha Shmois, before midnight, that the Alter Rebbe passed away. The Alter Rebbe, before his passing, according to one account, it was then that he wrote a letter called Nefesh HaShvela. In this letter, the Alter Rebbe talks about how there are very gifted souls who have a unique love and reverence for Hashem, and there are those which are not so gifted, and all they could do is just show up and do mitzvahs. And also to speak about the greatness of these special mitzvahs, although they're not done with passion, not done with reverence, but they're done with a sense of obedience. Also extolled the virtue of the simple performance of mitzvahs. And this letter was sort of like a last will and testament. Despite the great heights that Chassidus says we should be on, the Alter Rebbe also in this last letter was speaking about the simple observance of mitzvahs. So after the Alter Rebbe passed away, there was no place, there was no Jewish cemetery for 50 miles. The closest was in Haditch, where the Alter was brought to. And shortly afterwards, the Alter Rebbe's daughter passed away, and they there was now a question of where the Alter Rebbe the Mittler Rebbe should move to. And while they were traveling, they went through Shklov, and there Pinchas Reizes, one of the most prominent Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, there was a discussion with the Mittler Rebbe about where to move to, and the end decision was they should move to the city of Lubavitch. And when they moved to Lubavitch, there the Chassidim and Shklov were well to do, and they were able to support that move. And the Mittler Rebbe, when he was by his father, he went to his father's. He wasn't there when Alter passed away. He was in Kremenchuk, trying to find a place for the family to move to. So when the Mittler Rebbe came to the Alter's resting place, he swore to the Alter Rebbe that although the Chassidim are gathering lots of money for everyone, from all the Chassidim for him, that he should take over the Alter's position and they should rebuild his home somewhere. He is going to divide the money to support all the members of the Alter's family, and that's what happened. He moved the entire family to the city of Lubavitch, that remained the seat of Hasidim for the next 102 years until the time of the Rebbe Rashab. It's interesting with the Rebbe Rashab. moved out of Lubavitch, made the following remark 102 years later. The Rebbe Rashab said, it says in the Talmud, that if you study your lesson, you study the Talmud 100 and you review it 100 times, that's not considered remarkable because everyone in the time of the Talmud reviewed every lesson 100 times. You'll study it 101 times. That's remarkable. That's going beyond nature. But 102, said the Rebbe Rashab, that means that we've now set a new, if you're used to going beyond your nature, that also becomes your nature. And therefore that was what the 102 years in Lubavitch represented, going beyond that as well. And his bottom line is that this time that we're in now is a time of salvation to Jewish people. It's a time when Hashem allows us to ask for things, and as the Tzemach Tzedek taught, it's specifically with simcha, specifically with joy, that we draw down God's joy. And as the Alter Rebbe said, that the song of Napoleon, the song that he used for victory, that will become the song of victory for holiness. And actually, it's a tradition that we have every Yom Kippur. At the end of Yom Kippur, we sing this song, the song of Napoleon, Napoleon's army, which was against God. That's the song we sing. That's the tune we use to celebrate the victory that we have in Yom Kippur when Hashem seals us for a good and sweet year. So it's through this joy and through this trusting in Hashem that we draw down God's kindness, and we should see Hashem's goodness and kindness for each of us and all of us.